Hello, I'm Martin Holmes and I'm a storyteller. I'm going to tell you a story and I'm also going to draw the pictures as the story unfolds. I'm going to tell you a story of 3 people and 5 stones. The first person in this story was a king and his name was Saul. Now Saul was tall. He could have been called Tall Saul. Now when Israel was choosing their king, they chose Saul because he was about a foot taller, so that's about that much taller than any of the other candidates. The second person in our story was even taller. In fact, he was a giant of a man. He was over 9 feet tall. That's nearly 3 meters. His name was Goliath, and he was a Philistine. Now the Philistines had left their cities in Crete and Greece, and they were living in some of the cities in the west of Israel and some right up in the north. The third person in our story is a young shepherd boy called David. Now David was the youngest of the 8 sons of a man called Jesse. David's oldest 3 brothers were all in Saul's army and they were fighting against the Philistines. But David was too small and too young to join the army, so he was at home on the farm looking after the sheep. One day, David's father asked him to go up to where the army was to take them some food and to bring back news and to see how they all were. Now in those days, armies didn't fight the same as they do today. Very often what they would do, they would line up on opposite each other, and instead of everybody fighting together, they would choose the best and the bravest of soldiers, one from each side, and that they would go and fight each other. And whichever one of these 2 won, they would declare that their army had won the whole battle. It was a good way to do things because, well, it meant that not too many people got hurt or killed. Well, when David got to the front line, the Israeli army was lined up on one hill, and facing them on the other hill was the Philistine army. As David looked on, Goliath, the giant, stepped forward and shouted out, and he said, "Come on, you Israelites, choose your best warrior to come and fight me. If your warrior wins, we will become your servants. But if I win, you'll be our servants. Come on! Call yourself soldiers, do you? You reckon your God is so great? Come on!" Well, Goliath was so big, and the Israelites were so scared that they all ran away back to their tents. David followed his brothers into their tent and said, "What's going on? Why are you hiding in your tent?" "Well, you've seen the size of him," they said. "Every morning he comes out and challenges us, and every day we come back here and hide." I wonder if you sometimes feel like that. You feel that everything around you is too big or too difficult, and you're not big enough or clever enough or brave enough to do anything except to hide away. "But why aren't you going to go out and fight him?" asked David. "You are my big brothers, you're big and strong, and God is on our side." "Well, it's easy for you to say," they replied. "You're just a kid and you don't know anything about anything. Go back home where you belong and look after those sheep." David was so cross, he went to see Tall Saul, the king, and he said, "I'll go and fight this giant. We are God's people, this is God's land, and God will give us the victory." "You can't go and fight him," said Paul. "He's a trained soldier and a giant of a man. You're just a teenager." But David said, "I may just be a teenager, but I've been looking after my father's sheep, and when a bear or a lion came and stole one of the lambs, I would run after him, strike him, and rescue the lamb. I've killed both bears and lions, and I will kill this giant who dares to taunt the army of the living God." "Well, if you're sure," said Saul, "you'd better put my armour on." And Saul started to put his own armour on to David, but of course Saul was tall. He was over 6 feet tall, and David was, well, not much taller than 5 feet. It was way too big and heavy. David could hardly walk in it. "I don't need all this armour," said David. "I've killed bears and lions with just my shepherd's staff and my slingshot." A slingshot is a bit like a catapult. David took out his slingshot. He chose 5 smooth round stones and went out to meet Goliath. Goliath stepped closer to David and started to laugh and curse. "Who do you think you are to come out against me, the best warrior in the Philistine army? Do you think I'm a dog that will go running away with my tail between my legs? Come here, I'll sort you out. You think you're pretty big and powerful, but I've come against you in the name of the living God, who is much bigger and much more powerful than you," said David. "Today, everybody will know that the God of Israel is the God of all the earth." Goliath started walking towards David, and David started to run towards Goliath. He took a stone and put it in his slingshot and whirled it around on his head, around, and the stone flew through the air and it hit the giant right between the eyes. Goliath stopped. He stepped backwards and then he fell to the ground, dead. When the Philistines saw their hero was dead, they all turned around and they ran away. And that day, David became the hero of the day. Afterwards, David went back to his father's farm and continued to look after the sheep. But later on, when he was grown up, he became the king of Israel. But that's another story for another day. The story of David and Goliath is a great story. It's a story of good overcoming evil. It's a story of the weak and the small overcoming the big and the strong. It's also a story about hearing and trusting God. See, Christians believe that God is real and that He's on the side of truth and rightness, and that God will support and help anyone who believes and trusts and follows Him.